Thanks, everybody. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Some of that's on me, but all right. So where's the next? The next is a big green one. Okay, good. Yeah, I'm Ben Lesh. I have been working on this RxJS thing for quite a while. The big thing that I want to talk about, the title of this is Ending Operator Madness. Because I work on RxJS, I see a lot of RxJS code of varying degrees. Like some people use it a little bit, some people use it an awful lot. And a lot of that work that people have done has kind of inspired me to make some changes in RxJS 8, which is the current next version, if you will. It's an alpha, it'll be beta very, very soon. So I want to talk about that. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about RxJS in review, just really some quick history on it, because there's, every now and then I get questions about this. RxJS actually started or came out 12 years ago. So it was published more than 12 years ago by Microsoft, a gentleman named Matthew Podwasaki. He's an amazing guy, made the first publish a very long time ago. And if you look up on Wikipedia, there's a project of Microsoft called Microsoft Project Volta. And you notice the logo for Project Volta looks very familiar. It is a fuchsia electric eel. It's the same logo that we have for RxJS. What Project Volta was they were attempting to make a build target for .NET that was JavaScript. So they're trying to compile .NET to JavaScript. And so they had every .NET library, basically, or what do they call them, assemblies, or whatever they call them in .NET. It's been a few years since I've dealt with it, as a JavaScript library. And one of the really popular libraries at the time was Rx.NET. And so they made RxJS, which inherited all of the things from Rx.NET. So a lot of the operators you see today in RxJS were like handed to me years ago by Microsoft and like, here, look at all these amazing things an observable can do or whatever. Were born from that. They had things like the current thread scheduler, which doesn't make any sense in JavaScript. There's only one thread. But yeah, that's what it came from. And of course, Project Volta was ill-fated by another project of Microsoft's, which was, of course, TypeScript, which nuked any idea of needing to compile C# to JavaScript for type safety reasons, right? All right, so this gentleman in the wizard's hat is indeed a wizard. He is Matt Podwasaki. So he wrote he was responsible for RxJS for every version 4 and under. So if you can actually still install this version of Rx today, you just npm install Rx, not RxJS, but Rx. And it still gets used, like 1.5 million downloads a week. People are still using this. It is very different than the current version now, because it's been several years since this was last published. And this old version of RxJS actually outpaced Angular core until about 2020, 2021. Like, it was still in use. It was still growing in usage, in fact, which is really interesting. I just wanted to point it out. So RxJS 5 and up, that has been under my tenure working on RxJS. So this is, we actually took the project from Microsoft. It is now a truly open source. It's part of the ReactiveX org, where RxJava, RxKotlin, and a bunch of other RxPHP and those things live. It is up to almost 47 million downloads a week now. So it was at 46 or whatever when I took the screenshot. This started in 2015. And it was started to follow a TC39 proposal by a colleague of mine when I worked at Netflix. And to this day, that proposal still sits. It hasn't been canceled or denied. It just doesn't have a sponsor in the TC39. I'm happy to answer questions about that afterwards. So in about 2017, I introduced pipeable operators. And that was to solve a problem that we have in JavaScript where, yeah, you can add new methods to your prototype, but that prototype is it's globally shared state, right? So if I add a map method in my private library or my third-party library and you import it, then all of a sudden there's a map method on there, and if I remove it in my third-party library, then I break you. So that wasn't great. So pipeable operators kind of solved that problem, and that was a long time ago in 2017, a long time ago in tech anyway. So this is actually, I just wanted to show this chart too because it's kind of interesting. So the red line there at the top is RxJS. The yellow line there in the middle is React. So RxJS, just for an idea of like how often this is used. It's used in an awful lot of places, an awful lot of kind of infrastructure-y things. There's very little chance that if you went home and looked at your project that you work on for work or whatever and typed in npm ls RxJS, there's little chance that it wouldn't show up somewhere in your node modules. Like it's probably, even if you're not using it, some dependency you have is probably using it for something. And this is another thing, it's kind of interesting, is Lodash. Lodash, as far as I knew, was pretty much the king of like weekly downloads, aside from a few node things like probably Express might have it beat. But and RxJS over the years has slowly caught up to Lodash. And that's interesting because I often refer to RxJS as Lodash for events. Because what you do with RxJS is you deal with observables. And what observables are is they treat events as collections or sets of things. So this enables you to say, I want to map my events to something, or new events, or I want to filter my events down to a smaller set of events, or I can combine events together. You can basically query events like you could a database. So yeah, you've got this utilities for transferring collections of events. This might be a little hard to see, but basically I'm saying from an observable of mouse downs, every time you give me one of those, I want to take all the mouse movements until we have a mouse up, and I'm going to apply what I've calculated from this to some element, so I can drag it around. So this made a movable. This little bit of code here would make a movable object on the screen. And the other thing I'll point out is observables are actually all over the place. Not all of these libraries use RxJS, but if you're here and you're like, I don't really use RxJS. Well, one, it's a little weird you're watching me talk if you don't use RxJS, but you probably use React Query or React Router, TRPC, something in this list. And if you use anything in this list, you are currently using observables in production, in your production code. You maybe just don't realize it, but it's exactly the same shaped thing that you'll see in these. Some of them are almost identical to RxJS observables, in fact. All right, so these things are all a little different, though. They're all a little different, and one problem that causes is if you want to deal with them in RxJS, you have to use this from, and then pipe, and then from, and then pipe. So in this code here, you'll see, oh, I've got this observable of notifications, and then I filter them down to something or other, and then I've got a Redux thunk, so I do a store dispatch, and I get a promise back from that, and I want an observable because I want to do a retry. So that retry bit there is the part that you needed RxJS for because it's really good at that. But the rest of it, you didn't really need RxJS for. And like people will add all of this RxJS just so they can get that nice retry behavior off of that thunk. And what RxJS 8 is aiming to do is aiming to make it a little bit more palatable. So here, we're using a for await loop, right? This is very imperative type code, but you can see I've got that little bit in the middle where I'm wrapping the store dispatch in this Rx call, converting it to an observable, so I can get that retry behavior, and then I just subscribe to it with a for await loop. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But looking at this code, it's hopefully less intimidating than the big blob of RxJS stuff. So that's what I mean by ending operator madness a little bit. You can, of course, still do it the other way if you choose. All right, so the other thing that we can do with RxJS is also help with inconvenient platform APIs. So here I've got a fetch, and with fetch, if you want to read the binary data off the body, you have to get a reader from it, and you get like a text decoder, and then there's this read method that you have to await, and then you get it done in a value. Like, it's super inconvenient to deal with this sort of thing. And RxJS is able to just deal with stream readers, so you can use RxJS to just wrap that reader, and all of a sudden you can use a for await loop, and it's done. So it's just it provides a layer of interop. It makes it a little, and there's not a whole ton of Rx in there. In fact, there's only one call to this Rx method. So RxJS 8 is kind of is aiming to be like a unified set of tools, a true like Lodash for events. Like, here's a set of tools you can use to make your dealing with events a little bit easier. The other thing that RxJS 8 is doing is we've simplified the implementation a lot. So what that means is that any of our operators will accept anything that's subscribable. So that interface you see at the bottom where there's just a subscribe method on it, takes an observer, returns something with an unsubscribe on it. Anything that fits that will just work with RxJS 8 and our operators. So again, you can just bring your own subscribable. I'm sorry I didn't leave enough space for the captions there at the bottom, but basically I'm using a map operator on that object you see at the top. That object is nothing but an object with a subscribe function on it. So also in RxJS 8, we're providing a new way to pipe things, and this was born from something I showed a little bit before, which is if you want to pipe operators, like say you've got something that's not an observable, and you want to pipe, the very first thing, and this happens all the time because a lot of APIs return promises or async iterables or something like that, you have to do from some stream or some promise or whatever, and then you pipe, and you can use your other things. And then inside of your concat map, you might have to do another from, so you have from all over the place. In RxJS 8, we have this new Rx method, and you just provide the thing you want to convert as the first argument, and then all of your other operators after that. And it cleans up things quite a bit. It makes things a lot easier to deal with. So again, there's our RxJS 8, our RxJS 8 Rx function. Use it again there, and we don't need any of this stuff anymore, right? So just a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to read. In a lot of people's opinions, we kind of we did an RFC on this, and a lot of people liked it. The big thing, another big thing that we're doing in RxJS 8 is we're removing all the deprecated APIs. So we had, oh my gosh, like 50 to 70 might be an understatement for deprecated APIs that were living in the library for 4 or 5 years or longer. Those are all being removed. This slide is actually outdated, so it says it results in a 10% reduction in size. That's incorrect. It's more like a 30% reduction in size. And that's a 30% reduction in size from RxJS 7, which itself was a 50% reduction in size from RxJS 6. If you're still on 6 and you're sitting in this audience, you should be thinking about going home and changing that, because the newest version is 30 times faster and less than half the size, and it does more. So please do update. And I showed this off a little bit already. RxJS 8 makes observables able to use for await. It actually implements symbol async iterator on observable itself, which means that you can take stuff like this. You can still subscribe to things the traditional way, where you say, here's my notification stream, take them until some timer goes or whatever, and update notifications. Or you could write code that does roughly the same thing. I should probably move that if statement above the set notifications, but this does the same thing. And so I'm subscribing to the observable with a for await loop. And that behaves a lot like a concat map, because it waits till the body of that for await loop is done, and then it pulls off the next value and goes through the loop again. And inside of there, I'm just checking the date. So I get exactly the same thing from RxJS, but there's no piping, there's no subscribing. And when I call break on that loop, it actually unsubscribes from the observable for you. So it's a new, cleaner, more interesting way to subscribe to these things. So again, that's an observable. Just want to point that out. All right. Another thing that we're trying to do, and this isn't published yet, even though all the other things I just talked about have been published, is we're trying to break the library up. The main core of the library will still be the same as it always was, but we're also going to be publishing RxJS Observable separately. And the reason that we want to do this is there's an awful lot of libraries, TRPC, Apollo GraphQL client, that are interested in using RxJS Observable because it's battle tested and it's been around for years and a lot of people use it. And a lot of people use it alongside of their libraries, so it would reduce bundle size and that sort of thing. But they don't want to ship it and be like, here's all these operators, because people tie themselves in knots with RxJS operators quite often. So we have a library that we're going to publish that just has the observable and the requirements for observable, and that's it. So if you're a library author, or maybe you work in a place and you want to use observables, but you don't want your coworkers destroying you with merge maps, this is a good option for you. So again, it's just a standalone library. You just would pull it in like that, use it. Pretty self-explanatory. And so again, hopefully, we'll be able to get some of these folks that have identical, and I know that some of them are already interested, but some of these folks will be interested in using RxJS for their observable because, again, it's battle tested. It's got a lot of safety features in it that their observables do not have, and we're making it lighter and lighter weight over time. All right, so the next thing that's changing in RxJS 8, and I don't mean changing, the old way to write custom operators, if you want to write your own operator from scratch, will always work. we're giving people a new, better way to write operators. But just for a little history on this, what you see, and you can't read it, and that's okay, you don't need to read it. What you see on the left-hand side in RxJS 5, the first version I worked on, that's what you had to do to make a map operator. So all of that code, let's see, there's a custom subscriber in there, there's a map operator class, and there's the actual map function. Yeah, and then RxJS 8 is on the right-hand side, and you can see it does all the same stuff, but it's a lot less code, right? So right now, if you're using RxJS, the current latest version, RxJS 7, I think it's 7.8.1, what you would have to do, as not being me working in the core library, would be on the left-hand side. So you've got a lot of code there, and what we did in the core library is on the right-hand side, which you can see is a lot less. A little bit confusing what's in there, but nonetheless, that's where it is. And what we wanted to do is make a way for everyone to develop their operators that way. So this was kind of an experiment that really worked out well for us as far as size and safety, and we want to give that to other folks. So in RxJS version 8, how you would write one is on the left-hand side, and how I would write one in the core library is on the right-hand side. And do you see the difference? No, because they're the same. We write exactly the same thing. So you'll be developing operators the same way we do. And this has some advantages, but let's talk about what changed. So if you look at what you would have to do in version 7, it's right here. And you notice we've got some stuff where we're going to pull in this new operate function, and we're going to use it by just kind of wrapping what we have in there for our observer, and we're going to pass the destination subscriber, to it as destination. So you see destination : subscriber, or just name it destination and pass it in. And that destination is then wired up under the hood to kind of use these next error incomplete as overrides for its next error incomplete. What that means is you no longer have to, and just to go back, that error incomplete you see at the bottom, where it's just a pass through to that destination, you don't have to do that anymore. That's gone, because it does that for you automatically. The other thing you don't have to do is you see that try catch, where you have to catch any errors that happen in your user provided function and pass it to the error. That goes away as well, because it does the try catching for you. And that's how we're able to make the operator so much smaller. So if you were going to write your own map function, it would look like this, with this new way to do things. And you could also go look at our core library and get an idea of how you should write the operator, and it would be exactly the same. This also helps handle what's called the synchronous fire hose. Not a lot of people know what this is. If you get heavy into RxJS development, you will come across it one day, I guarantee you. It's a weird corner case, and you'll be like, what? But I'll explain it. So let's just say we make this observable, and I named it fire hose. Observables, as you know, when you subscribe, will execute this little function body here at the moment you subscribe, and then the subscription returns an observable. Now, when you unsubscribe from that subscription, it flags subscriber.close, which means this while loop, we're saying, okay, while the subscriber's not closed, just next. But this is a synchronous loop, right? This is just going to keep going. So what that means is, if you want to subscribe to this, you subscribe to Firehose, you get a subscription back, you want to unsubscribe from it instantly, good luck, because you're drinking from a fire hose. It's going to next at you with that single thread forever. This movie is really funny. It's UHF. I don't know if anyone here has seen it, but one more time. All right. So it never returns a subscription, right? Because it's stuck in that synchronous loop. It can't get to the line where it's going to return that subscription, and that means that unsubscribe is never going to get called, that subscriber closed is never going to flag, and that loop is never going to stop, right? That's the synchronous fire hose problem. And it gets especially gnarly, and I know this is a lot of code, but if you write your own flattening operator. So a flattening operator is something like a merge map or a concat map, or basically anything that says, hey, give me an observable of observables, or give me an observable, I'll make it into inner observables and subscribe them and next those things out. This gets weird because if you look through this code, you'll see that right there, we have to wait for that inner observable to return its subscription to add it to the outer subscription. So if anything downstream says, hey, I want to stop this, like a take 10, it'll be like, yeah, I've taken 10 and you're getting 10, but that loop inside of there is going to keep going forever. So if I add a tap in there and I was to subscribe to this whole thing, what you'd see is it would log out the first 10 values twice, and then the rest of the values would just keep getting logged forever because it's being logged by that tap. That unsubscribe never happens. And we don't have that problem because we're chaining, in RxJS, we're chaining the subscribers together ahead of time. So what you'd have to do in version 7 is this really verbose thing that you'd see here, where basically you would move everything, you'd create a subscriber, and then you have to add that subscriber, and you see it's deprecated API too. We don't want people like newing these things up for valid reasons that I could get into later. But then you have to add it to the subscription and then subscribe to it. So that way it's wired up ahead of time. But in version 8, you don't have to think about it, because when you pass that destination in, it automatically wires that stuff up for you. So it's safer to do things this way. It solves that problem and you don't have to think. All right, so just to talk about this again, it's less boilerplate, it's way safer. If you'll never forget to try catch something, you're less likely anyways. You won't forget to forward a signal. It handles that synchronous fire hose problem that you probably didn't even know about until this talk, most likely. Hopefully you didn't know about it. It's way less code. And you can go to the repo and be like, how did they develop this? And our code is fairly well documented, like with comments about why we did certain things. So you should be able to just look at that and then imitate it, and you'll be okay. All right. The last thing I kind of want to talk about here, and we're going to get to it in version 8, is there's a stage 3 proposal for the TC39 called disposables. And what's circled up here on the screen is this weird little using statement. This might not be super useful for RxJS, but we still want to do it because we want to be part of the platform. And what this is any object that has implemented symbol dispose, which is just a method, symbol dispose, this using statement will take it, and at the end of your scope, when things fall out of scope or when your object falls out of scope, it will call that dispose function. And so we can implement this on subscriptions, and what that means is you can have an async function. You can say, subscribe to this observable for as long as this async function is living, and as soon as it falls out of scope, it'll unsubscribe. Maybe not the most useful thing, but something to keep an eye on. We're going to be looking into doing that. All right, so just a quick rundown of everything. It is smaller and lighter by a lot. We're removing a lot of those old deprecations that have been pestering people in their IDEs for years. Developing custom operators will be a lot safer for everybody. If you develop a lot of custom operators you're using RxJS, I really recommend updating or at least even trying the next version as soon as you can. Observables just work with 408. They can be async iterables. They've got that interop. Any subscribable, if you write something and you're like, I don't want to wrap it in a whole observable and it's already got a subscribe function, as long as that subscribe function adheres to that standard observable pattern, it'll just work. We've got the RxJS observable library for authors, and we're also outputting a lot better ECMAScript as our target. We were honestly ES 2015 for a very long time. And so now it's at ES 2022 right now. It'll probably be 2023 here shortly. Another thing, because of that, we don't have the tslib dependency anymore, so that goes away if you care about seeing that in your bundle. Somebody else probably is adding it to your bundle, though. It's probably not just me. All right, so if you want to use this right now, you can use all of these things I talked about right now, with the exception of the using statement. That's got to come from the TC39. But you can npm install RxJS at latest. I have done this in a production app already. It's a little safer when the author of the library tries it, right? But I had no issues. So there's not a lot that's going to change or break on folks at this point, but there's a few other things we would like to add. And that's the reason right now it's still technically in alpha. In the next few weeks, we'll see it land in beta, and I'm hoping for a late summer release of the library. That's it. Thank you very much. So I'll be in the Q&A room right after this for questions if anybody has any.